Very hot. My phone is overheating like crazy, and I'm not able to. Oh no, there I am. It's recording. So I really do hope I get a video out this time. When it's really hot, my phone just conks out. It just can't finish the video. So anyway, I'm going to try my best to do a nice quick one for you, which is what I consider to be the likely final outcome. Now again, I don't want to say that this is the only option, because there are many possible options. Now at the moment, I see if Trump fails to reach an agreement between Ukraine and Russia, I think the most likely outcome is that USA will withdraw funding for Ukraine, and when that happens, I think either the other countries will also withdraw funding or else they will limit it, and soon after that Ukraine will fall. Now when Ukraine falls, I expect that Russia will do one of two things. They could either take control of the whole of Ukraine for themselves and order Ukraine to do whatever they want them to do. That's one option. And if they do that, I expect that either Viktor Yanukovych or Petro Poroshenko will return to presidency of Ukraine. They're both former presidents. If Viktor Yanukovych is the president, Ukraine will return to being extremely Russia friendly. Now, if it is Petro Poroshenko, then I expect that Ukraine will be a bit hostile to Russia, but they will at least acknowledge that they have Nazis within them, and they will agree to cede some territory to Russia. So that's if Russia take over. Obviously in both scenarios, I expect for the Nazi Party to be banned from Ukraine, as it is in every other country in the world, and I expect that all of the anti-Russian policies, such as against Russian churches in Ukraine and against the Russian language in Ukraine and many other things, will end, and that there will be an acknowledgement of guilt on Ukraine's part. Now, that's if Russia take over. There is this second alternative, which is that Russia only take over a small portion, which could be as little as half of Ukraine, and that half will go permanently to Russian control. That is, I consider that to be the least likely of the two outcomes, but it is possible. And if that's the case, then you'll probably have Russian Ukraine and an independent Ukraine, and they might call it East Ukraine, even though bits of it will be a bit further on the west. And I'm not sure which borders they'll have. Certainly not going to be the bits that just the bits that Russia control today. So they're the two outcomes if Trump fails. Now I know it is possible that Trump will increase spending and give more money to Ukraine. I can't see any scenario in which that is possible. I don't think that will happen. So they're the two options if Trump stops giving money to Ukraine. Now, how long will it take? It could be 6 months if they just only go for the half, or it could be a year. I doubt it'll be longer than a year. You never know, it might be longer, but I can't see it being very much longer. So they're the two options there, but the other way is that Trump reaches an agreement. Now, what is the agreement likely to be? I think the bare minimum is that Russia will get to permanently control, and USA will acknowledge it, and Ukraine will also acknowledge the 5 areas that they have annexed, and probably a few more that they haven't annexed yet. There'll be Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, the other two that I can never remember their names, that they annexed previously in their referendums, and probably a few more. So how many, it's hard to be sure, but it'll be somewhere between those 5 and half of Ukraine. It won't be half of Ukraine. It'll be less than that. It could be it'll probably be the extremely Russian-friendly areas, the areas that have a lot of Russian ethnicity and Russian language speakers who are very sick of the way that Ukraine has been treating them, and particularly in the last few years. So you'll find, and I can't be guaranteeing which oblast these will be, but you'd find that there will be quite a lot there, and you're also going to have a lot of control with all this. Now, a lot of influence by USA, by United Nations and so forth. Now the other option is that, and the one that I've been favouring the whole time, which is that they have a free and fair elections that are overseen by USA over probably around about half of Ukraine. So they're only going to be, Russia will pick which ones, they're only going to be the ones that are Russia friendly. And then those ones will go out to the polls individually, oblast by oblast, and say, do we want to be in Russia? Do we want to stay in Ukraine? USA is going to try their best to make sure that that is done fairly and freely, and other countries are going to get involved. And you're going to find a lot of other countries are getting involved, maybe even every country in the world, probably not every single one, but all the big ones, you know, you're going to find all the influential ones, a lot of not so influential ones. They're all going to go there and say, oh, we want to send a representative. And what you're going to find at the end of that is that there will be certain ones will say yes, certain ones will say no. And what will happen is that different countries will agree as to whether or how they draw their maps. So you're going to have a lot that will just say, all right, well, Ukraine's just the 2013 borders before the autonomy, before the Maidan Revolution. And then some are going to say, all right, well, it's the 2015 borders after the Maidan Revolution and autonomy. We've got 3 independent or at least autonomous areas. They might draw them as independent. And then you're going to have the ones that say, well, Crimea is part of Russia, but nowhere else is. And then you're going to have all 3 of those part of Russia. Then you're going to have the 5 part of Russia, and so forth. And you're going to have disagreements. You're going to have a different map depending on which country, and these will change in time. And it'll take a number of years before we get an agreement as to what is Ukraine and what is Russia, and potentially what is independent as well, and what's autonomous, and all sorts of things like that. And that's going to be an ongoing thing. Now you might think that's a terrible idea. That sounds awful, but I actually think that's the best solution. Now obviously I don't see any scenario in which the Azov Battalion continues to be a part of Ukraine's National Guard. I see that as untenable moving forward. I also see it as untenable for Ukraine to continue to have their anti-Russian laws against Russian Orthodoxy churches and against the Russian language being spoken. I see those as being extremely racist, and I think that the United Nations should send a group out to Ukraine to try to work out how to best deal with this, and that could take several years as well. Now there are things such as war crimes, reparations and such. I don't see any of that happening. I know that both sides did commit war crimes objectively. I also know that there's a lot of reported war crimes that were blamed on Russia that actually were done by Ukraine, and there were some that were blamed on Russia that didn't actually happen. So the actual war crimes will be different to what people have been told in the press, but there definitely were war crimes by both sides. Russia certainly committed some war crimes, Ukraine certainly committed some war crimes. There's no doubt about that. Whether either side will be held accountable for it, I find it very unlikely. Russia, as a founding member of the United Nations, can veto any claims to try anyone for war crimes, and Ukraine will be protected by USA, or should be. Now there could be a scenario in which some of the war crimes will be held responsible, such as the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline, or the destruction of the bridge in Kharkiv by almost certainly Ukrainian soldiers. So they were both war crimes, and they could be held responsible to Ukraine. Do I think it's likely that they will be? I don't think so, but it is plausible that we could have some of the more obvious ones that were definitely committed by Ukraine, that were very impactful, and that we have no doubt that they definitely happened and that they were definitely done by Ukraine. And these ones might happen, but I still don't think it's very likely. Will there be any reparations? Definitely not by Ukraine. They don't have the money. And also, I don't think Ukraine were actually responsible for this war. I think USA were. And I don't think it's in best interests of Trump to negotiate for USA to be found guilty and to have to pay reparations. So there's a potential that Russia could try to sue USA for reparations. I think that'll probably all fall apart, and most likely we'll just have an agreement that we just move on. So that's what I see to be the most likely outcome. Now, it's not set in stone. There are a few other options. I think the idea of a frozen conflict is farcical, and I don't see either side agreeing to that. Ukraine might. I also don't see any scenario in which you're saying that Ukraine get a favoured deal. I can't see any scenario where that's possible. It's not in USA's best interest to favour Ukraine, and I think that Trump got into power largely based on an acknowledgement that it is not in USA's best interest to support Ukraine at this time. And so I can't see any scenario in which Ukraine end up objectively winning. Also, we have to note that if Ukraine does objectively win, there will almost certainly be global thermonuclear war that will end the life of every single person on this planet, or at least the vast majority of us. And the few that remain will probably be in a pretty bad shape. And I can't see that being worth it. under this sort of circumstances. So I think there will be a lot of long-term ramifications of this, but certainly the idea that Ukraine will objectively win is not one of them. Never really was. Even under Joe Biden, I don't think there was ever any scenario in which Ukraine were ever going to win, even from the time it started. But some people will claim that Ukraine have won. And I think Ukraine will tell you, no matter what happened, they will say that they won, considering whatever they want to consider. And look, that's not uncommon in war. You often find both sides will say that they won. They'll both declare victory. And I think this war could well be, and I think most likely will be, a war which ends with both sides declaring victory. And our press will probably try to paint it as if Ukraine had objectively won. And I think that's likely to happen. I think we're going to say, look, Ukraine won because blah, blah, blah. Even though anybody looking at that will go, hang on, they lost. But we might not be saying that for another 10 years. And then we'll move through the propaganda and say, oh, actually they lost. But for the short term, I think Ukraine's going to declare victory. Russia are too. Russia are going to objectively win. And I see that as being the end of the war, like I suggested. I think the most likely one is the voting. But it's not the only option. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye-bye now.